Welcome to the Fractured Families podcast. I'm Charity, your dedicated parental alienation coach, here to guide and support families as they navigate the challenges of high conflict divorces and custody battles. On this podcast, we'll share insights, practical strategies, and hope for those on the journey toward healing and justice. Whether you're personally experiencing these challenges or just want to learn more about the complexities of parental alienation and custody disputes, you're in the right place. You are not alone. This is the Fractured Families podcast where every voice matters and every story is heard. And if you find my conversation helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us reach more families who need it. Hey, thanks for joining the Fractured Families podcast. I'm Charity, your host. I have with me today Dr. Sandra Speer, PhD. She's a world-renowned abuse corruption analyst who has worked with domestic violence survivors for over 40 years as an advocate and expert witness. As a survivor herself, she understands what you are going through and that abuse and corruption must be revealed in the family court system to ensure that this change will occur. Because she is not an attorney or a mental health practitioner, she can help anyone who is suffering from child protective service challenges or parental alienation anywhere in the world. She helps you to understand your case and assist with anything necessary to facilitate reunification with your children. Dr. Sandra Speer is also a published author of academic articles, books, and case studies that support her clients. She proudly calls herself the legal advocate that works for you, not for the court. We are really excited to have you here, Dr. Speer. Thanks for joining. Let's get started a little bit about you, how long you've been in this space, and then we'll go on with the interview.
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me. It's an honor to be
Yeah.
here. I started young because I was abused as a child, and it was rape, and it was quite a few other things, but I disassociated so much that I really didn't come to complete fruition of what I went through until I was in my 50s. But in the meantime, I did know that I had been raped and things like that by others outside my, didn't think that my parents were abusing me. I thought that this man was abusing me. That's where the issues went with the disassociation, but it turned out to be my mother. My mother was a psychopath. And believe it or not, my father was a psychologist. So he enabled it. And so what happened was when I was about 18 years old, I grew up in New Orleans right by the Mississippi River, the levee. And I stood on the levee and I said, one day I'm going to use everything that I've learned in life and everything that I've gone through to help other people who have gone through the same things. Little did I know that I was going to go through 2 bad marriages because of thinking that, as most survivors do, I thought that that was normal to be abused. It was a feeling that I felt safe when I was abused. When I wasn't being abused, I tried to run away from every relationship that I had. And that's a leftover situation from sometimes parental alienation or trauma. And then I wasn't allowed to basically go to college. I was told because I have vision issues that I would never amount to anything. So I finally later in life went back to school and I got my bachelor's degree and my master's degree are both in business. And I also at the time was a broadcaster in radio. And I decided that, and I had been working in domestic violence on the side throughout the years because I just couldn't stand to see other people going through what I had gone through. And then when I went through the marriages, I learned how horrible these cases are. I went through the parental alienation and the abuse and the threats and the everything that everyone went through, and I went through it myself, but I won my case, which most people were very shocked because I fired my attorney. I got furious with my attorney. My mother told my attorney that I deserved to be in a mental institution. I was so sick. Well, of course, I became infuriated with my mother, but I didn't want to take time doing that. About the only time my father ever really spoke up for me was during that case. My mother did not want me to make it public because I was part of the public eye at the time, and she didn't want me to make the case public and hurt a lot of people, which I ended up having to do to save my children, get my children back. My father said, no, stay away from her, let her do what she needs to do. I got my children back. I fought the system. I got the mayor involved. I got everyone I could involved. Those were nicer days, though. People actually helped people a little more in those days. I'm talking 20, 30 years ago. Well, in the meantime, I started helping friends going through these cases. And I started to see the pain and realizing that I had the ability to actually help. So I was going to go back and get my doctorate in psychology, but I got my doctorate in public safety because I wanted to do the advocacy work. And so when I finally did graduate, to the surprise of my mother, because she didn't think she kept telling me I would never get my doctorate because of I didn't take her help. Well, the interesting part about that is while she was saying that, I had my degree already for 6 months. By the time I finally told her, and after she had been telling me for all those months that I needed her help to do it, um, she tried everything. I have trigeminal neuralgia. She beat me when I was 58 years old. I'm a little older, and she was 88. And it was the same type of fear that I hear from survivors. I was afraid to fight back because she's older. She was threatening, she and my brother were threatening to put me in jail for elder abuse, which my brother was committing elder abuse. He was beating her. Um, they were, they would get into it. And I knew all this. And then I just said, well, wait a minute. I am strong. I'm very good at this. I need to share this ability with other people. So, about almost 10 years ago, I began to work internationally as I've worked in South Korea. I've worked in Europe. I've worked here in the United States. And basically, what I've learned is that family court is the same everywhere. They have no rules, basically. Everything is financial. I saw something today that updated on some cost factors, and I saw that it's about 11,000 a month that the system gains from bringing as many children as they can into their system. And then they get a separate fee for adoptions. They get more fees once their children are taken. I'm talking about child protection services right now. Once their children are taken, they're diagnosed all of a sudden with autism and ADHD and these types of things because they don't understand that the symptoms of ADHD and autism are very, very much the same as a child going through trauma. And the system wants these children to have these disabilities because it makes more money for them. It's a horrible system. And then in if you're dealing in family court with a high conflict divorce case, you're basically dealing with the same thing because one misunderstanding that comes across to me very often is that who can commit parental alienation? Anyone. Caseworkers do it. Attorneys do it. These judges are just brutal. They will literally work toward alienating you and making you afraid of the court because there's a legal system syndrome where it gets to the point where the person gets sick going into court. So, and then you're financially drained because it's the attorney's goal to keep you going back and going back and going back and going back. So, what do? You just keep on fighting. Now, I tell people do not give up because if you give up, then you're actually giving up on your children. And often when children reach maturity, they see what is going on, and what happens is they will come back to the targeted parent. And that often happens. I saw one case in Texas where the attorney came back to my client and said, there's no point in you hiring a parental alienation analyst because um, they're not going to listen to parental alienation. Well, I said, let me talk to the attorney. So I talked to the attorney and I said, I'm absolutely finding that this is the only thing in this case because it is psychological abuse. This child is being psychologically abused to hate his mother. He's being told that the mother is abandoning him. And abandonment is part of why these parental alienators will commit the parental alienation that they're doing is because as children, often they were abused in the same manner or abandoned by the alienating parent. So what they're doing is rather than getting therapy and coping with what they're doing, they're reacting to their abandonment as a child or some type of trauma. But back to this case, it was very, very interesting because I got on and I told the attorney, I said, you've got to pay attention. And I told my client, I said, send my report to him. He needs to see it because it's emotional abuse, it's psychological abuse, and it becomes chronic as the child becomes older. It's cruelty. And so he read my report and he said, wow, you're right. So I said, okay, let's go to court with this and fight it as it is. The woman reunited with her child. Because
Wow.
what I do is I say parental alienation, but I'm always very careful to use the legal definition, which is the basic alienation of one parent from the child by any individual that has anything to do with the children. As I said, it can be a caseworker, it can be anyone. It doesn't necessarily have to be the other parent. And so I'm very careful. When I feel like I have to attack the court, I try to attack the attorney because if I attack the court, I'm alienating the court. But yet in Louisiana, I had another case that I couldn't help but to attack and I got a claim for that one from an attorney out of California who came to me and she said, I've never seen anything where do you get your information? This is good, this is powerful. Well, I helped to start a legislature over in Louisiana. They're supposed to be helping family court improve, wipe out some of this corruption. Louisiana is horrible. But now I had an issue with a legislature, a representative there, and she said, oh, this is a wonderful program. We're doing such and such. And I said, well, it's 6 months into it and I don't see anything happening. And she said, where do you get your information? I said, from you. And she says, and that's the point I'm trying to make. And yes, they're starting to see a little bit of an improvement. California's terrible. Texas is terrible. Kansas is terrible. And another thing that's happening within the system is that they're trying to go to private organizations to run these. And like, for instance, in Kansas, there's a religious sector that owns most of the foster care system and is infiltrating their family court system. And kids are being left in offices where they can't find foster homes for them rather than sending back. And the point of the system is not being and family court, I'm going between family court and CPS because they are very similar.
Why don't you help us understand? So our listeners are going through it. Most of my listeners are either impacted as a spouse, as a spouse's spouse, as a parent themselves, as a sibling, a grandparent. So let's talk about how Child Protective Services, what role they play, and then how it gets to family court or vice versa.
Okay, well, what happens? Well, it can be vice versa. Let's start with the high conflict divorce case. What often happens is the targeted parent, okay, when you have parental alienation, there's also usually another form of abuse going on, whether it's neglect or sexual abuse. The two that I usually see that go along with parental alienation is neglect, medical neglect, especially interesting, that goes along with it, and psychological neglect in the form of taking away very good therapists that might be seeing what's going on. So as soon as they see what's going on, they take them out. That what happens is the targeted parent sees this abuse going on. So they turn to CPS for assistance. CPS says, no, it's unsubstantiated. Sexual abuse is one of the worst because it's almost impossible to prove. And because there's very rarely witness to sexual abuse, it's impossible, almost impossible. So as soon as as the spouse says, "Oh, there's sexual abuse going on," the courts become negative. And it's a very serious thing because I would say about 75% of the cases that I get do involve sexual abuse.
Do you have any statistics on of that 75%? How much of those are substantiated?
It takes a lot to substantiate a sexual abuse case.
Okay.
What I am actually is an abuse corruption analyst. That's what I specialize in. And so when I look at the abuse, I look at the psych reports that come in, the psychological evaluations that come in, the GAL reports, the guardian ad litems, and they're really most of them, I would say 99% of them are for the birds because they work
Of
for the
course.
court.
Yeah.
In the parenting coordinators. So I take all this information plus whatever text messages I can get to. I look at conversations, I look at emails, I look at everything that a person has on their case. And I compare it to the reports because the reports are often skewed to help the court. And another shocking situation with these reports that I've learned is I did a little bit of research couple when AI started really getting popular because I had noticed an enormous similarity in my cases among the reports and even the diagnoses. And I said, no, something's wrong here. So I did a little research and I started seeing that I was right, that I was seeing almost the same reports from one case to the other. And then I said, wait a minute, where are they getting these reports? So I looked it up. They're buying these reports, these guardian ad litems. I'm not saying all of them, but I have run into it. And they come up with, and because not everyone has the same diagnosis, not everyone has the same personality disorder.
Right.
So I said, this is crazy. And that's the value of my report. And that's why the courts, they are beginning to accept me more and more as the years go by. At first, I was a newbie on there because nobody had really said, "Look, I'm looking at abuse and corruption." Now, I'm looking at the psychological end. I'm looking at all these things because I understand the criminal mind. I had to learn that as my part of my training. I say, this is where the abuse is occurring, and yes, we have to look at history because anyone who's fought a high conflict divorce case with children involved or any type of abuse involved, understand that one of the things that the courts do to you is they say, okay, you can only talk about things that have gone on in the last 6 months to a year. You have to understand the history of a person and a history of their actions to be able to understand that they are capable of what a person is saying that they're doing. Okay, without that history, it's almost impossible. So what happens is the court comes in and says, no, you can't go past 6 months. And I say, yes, you can. Look at it. This is what happened. And I only just enough just to, plug it in. But they say, well, wait a minute. They did that 6 months ago, or they did that a year and a half ago, or they did that before. So what happens is because they only go back 6 months to a year, this is where CPS comes in. CPS gives their report of unsubstantiated because nothing's going on right now. Because, of course, if someone's in court and they know they're going to court, of course they're going to be good.
Right.
Of course they're going to straighten up. Sometimes I get involved in cases just to scare the other party into stopping the abuse. And I do that all the time. And so CPS stops everything and said, because they are this between them and the guardian ad litems and the parenting coordinators who have looked at the case within the last 6 months. Okay, well, there's nothing going on. Everything's fine. Here, hand the child to the abuser. And that's basically what happens with high conflict divorces. CPS, I would say 65, 75% of the time, they will take a child that does not need to be taken and hold them until they go into adoption and everything else. And they won't take children that need to be taken.
They get it wrong.
Yeah, I've seen it so many times. And they do it, they have all types of different techniques that they use. They use intimidation, they scare the parents, they use parental alienation on the children, and then 65, 76, it's very high. The children are being abused in foster care. So is that right? Most of these children that get taken are being more abused in foster care than they were when they were with their parents. And the whole premise of the system is being negated. It originated in, I think it was the 1950s, as a system to reunite parents with the children and help the parents reunite with all these classes and things. And now they ignore these classes. And if you go in and say, oh, I want my own psychological evaluation, I'll hire my own person, they won't accept the evaluation because it doesn't match what they want to deliver to the court.
It doesn't fit their agenda. So they hire, that's part of the corruption, is that they have the people that work within their system so that they can get the outcomes that they want. And that's what the money goes into, is those outcomes, because that's what fuels the corruption.
Exactly. I've seen people that can barely feed themselves being charged $20,000 for a report that feeds the system. I mean, it's sad. It is sad. I've seen so many things. I had one woman, her ex shot her leg off in a fight one day. And she had all the evidence that the children were also being abused. And what the system came back and said to her was that even though she was so mutilated from abuse, that didn't mean that he was actually abusing the children too. And they don't think
So
that.
do you think that the courts get it wrong on purpose? Do you think that they get
Yeah.
it wrong so that
A
they
lot of
can
times,
profit?
yes, absolutely. Because one, there's an enormous amount of under the table money. Okay. And I've also worked in, I work in public safety. And something I've learned how to recognize is when, there's either a future trafficking situation or a trafficking ring going on. And the sick part about most of our trafficking situations is that it's government bodies running the system. And I'd rather not name any, states or anything because I do have some open cases going on. I work with the FBI and Department of Homeland Security as well. And a lot of people have come back to me and said, well, CPS is feeding the trafficking. I said, no. What's going on is these abused children are running away without any support. What would you do if somebody tempted you with thousands and thousands of dollars, or he gave you a home when you were homeless? What would you do? I know there's a grooming of children for trafficking, but I'm trailing off into a different subject. But these are the things that come back to me from parents. And yes, CPS does lose children. They literally don't know where children are, and they will admit it. The Texas family court judge tell me after I said she was bragging about the cases that she had taken over from another corrupt judge. And she was talking about how well she was doing and this and that. And I said to her, I said, well, that's interesting. I said, because between what you're saying and then my research, I have found an enormous amount of corruption in Texas, and a lot of horrible cases of children disappearing, everything, anything you can think of, sexually abused children being, sent to abusers knowingly. Because that's the sickest part about this, is a lot of times that sexual abuse or neglect is apparent to the court. They see it, they know it, and it gets ignored. And this judge says back to me, she says, well, I know our system is corrupt. I said, well, what do you think is causing the corruption? And I said, do you think anything will ever be done about it? She said, no, I don't. I said, what do you think is really truly causing the corruption? And I said, is it ignorance or is it financial? She wouldn't answer me. And I said, well, I know it's financial. I said, but ignorance feeds corruption. And that's part of it. These judges, these attorneys who negate parental alienation, they don't understand what it is. They don't understand how damaging it is to children, nor do they care. But
Mhm.
because a lot of times the person who can pay the most child support loses custody of the children. Yeah, loses custody of the children. The whole system is sick. And no, we need to keep family court. There's no real great solution except let's educate and let's face the fact of what's going on. And no, people should not give up. Keep on fighting, but fight smart. And that's what I tell people. That's why it's a good thing to have work with me, because I'll work through it and I'll help you. And I go, let's get this direction. I think what is the sickest part about this is that without educating our judges as to what's going on and moving in and saying this is actually what's going on,
Yeah.
we're harming the next generation.
Yeah. What about the lawyers? I mean, in your case, you fought yourself. So many of my listeners and my clients, they hire lawyers, and in the beginning the lawyers say, "Oh yeah, we're going to fight for you. We know what this is." But the reality is, once you get a lawyer, they're going to say yes to everything. And then when you start asking them to fight for your rights, or you even say this is parental alienation, we can't talk about that. There are ways to bring up parental alienation in your hearing in front of your judge without saying the words, right? And then minors counsel, that's a big challenge because the minors counsel is supposed to be protecting the child. But what I find normally and regularly, consistently, is that the minor's counsel becomes manipulated by the narcissistic alienating parent, and then they start to actually turn against the targeted parent. And so all the reports, to your point, they're biased because they've made a decision early on that they were going to believe the stories of the child that were clearly coerced by the alienating parent, and then they become manipulated by that parent. How do you help parents with those situations?
Those are very, very difficult. But a lot of times, and that's where it comes in that I'm not an attorney, okay? I can go anywhere I need to go to prove my point. I do actually have quite a few cases in that situation, but I have one that is extremely, and I'm on the verge of winning that one, because what happened was okay, I had one in Louisiana where my report got to the court and it was so damaging to the attorney, to the minors counsel, that they had to get off the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, that helped and that stopped the child from being abused because the person became afraid. Well, this other situation in California is pretty much the same thing, except that the alienating parent is still abusing the child. But what they're upset about is that the courts are beginning to actually look at my reports and saying, wait a minute, something is going on. And she got so mad about that report because it got to the court, and she literally sent me an email and said, if you don't get off this case, you're going to have a lawsuit on your back. I said, try me, and I'm still on the case. But I don't give
Yeah.
up. I don't threaten. It's these minors counsel, most of them should be in jail. Most of them should just oh, and these attorneys, yes, these attorneys are horrible. They'll take your money, tell you the song and dance, and then up to and including the day before court, I've seen many of
Oh
them.
yeah.
And they go to court and turn on you.
100%.
And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know what?
And
A
that's a
lot of it is
challenge.
bribery.
It's a challenge. We have a case where it turned criminal, and up until the fourth day of trial, the attorney was on our side. And then right before closing arguments, you can see the attorney flip. They go into a meeting with the prosecutor, and all of a sudden they unravel on you. And you
Yeah.
at that point you don't even know what you're supposed to do because you've paid this person, you've trusted them, and for whatever reason they've negotiated some deal on some other case for some other favor, and then you become the catastrophic outcome of that negotiation with those two. So attorneys, it's really important to pick the right attorney, but even picking the right attorney, it can be backfire on you, right?
Just
What recommendations do you have for an alienating parent going through or starting to recognize the 17 alienating behaviors and the 8 manifestations from the child? Do you have any recommendations for our listeners on how to pick an attorney?
Well, I find that if an attorney knows you have an advocate on your case, especially if the advocate is educated, has the PhD, that's a very powerful situation, because what I do is I'll actually interview the attorneys with my clients.
Okay.
And I can see through them in a minute.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
if I don't like what they're saying to my client, I'm going to say no.
Yeah.
The other situation is, hiring an attorney is one of the hardest parts, because after you've given them $10,000 or
Mhm.
whatever they're asking for, you've thrown your money away by the
Yeah,
time you
for sure.
realize who they are and what they are. You can look at history, you can look at Google reviews, but I wouldn't trust those either, because attorneys have programs that they can take all the
Mhm.
bad, reports out. Try to talk to other clients that they've had. That's a hard one,
Yeah.
because a lot of people need an attorney because they are afraid to go into court alone. I take a lot of pro se clients and I can get them into court and ready for court. And that helps a lot. A lot of pro se people are starting to win their cases
Mhm.
because
Yeah, I
they
agree.
don't have someone turning against them.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a rough one. But
Mhm.
as I tell people, don't fight alone.
Mhm.
Never fight alone. And don't be the only one to talk to your attorney. And if you have an advocate and that attorney says, I don't like advocates or something like that, or any
Mhm.
type of negativity toward an advocate, run away from them as fast as you can.
That's
That's
a good
one piece
point.
of advice.
Yep.
If they give you a great big song and dance about how great you're going to win and this and that, and that's another red flag. I
Mhm.
don't like the ones that do that.
Yeah. So let's talk about reunification. So for the cases that you win, do you work with families to help them reunify with their children, or how do you support that piece of the puzzle?
What I do is my reports, whether it's CPS or, the high conflict, those are what we use to help reunite. And yes, if I have to bring in other officials, I do. That's where it comes in. It's forcing, it's a matter of forcing the court to look at your evidence. And the way I do it is I lay out these reports and I put all the evidence in there along with the research and everything. So if they get the report, they've got the evidence. And they go, we can't fight this, because I don't give opinions. I give evidence, research, and that's it. And that's as far as I go. I'll suggest, along with the greats in the industry that suggest that we should have criminal, punishments for parental alienation, because psychological abuse, any form of abuse, even though I had an attorney general tell me some forms of of emotional abuse are legal. I said, okay, then which ones? She couldn't answer.
Horrible.
I've had a little bit of everything. Um, because I do talk to the politicians and I do talk to the representatives and senators and as far as I have to go to get, I will do whatever it takes to help a child go back to the proper parent. It is a difficult process, but it's something that you should not give up. Now, something else that I just have to interject this. In developing a case, a lot of people are recommended to report, 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 report. No, no, no. That actually can end up fighting against you. Because what happens is, if the police officers come out to the situation and they see something that they'll a lot of times they'll arrest both parents, and then it comes out you're right back where you started. Or they'll say, well, we didn't see it happen, so no abuse occurred. Or if you're trying to report, that he's alienating by holding on, he, she, whatever, holding on to the child by custody interference. They'll say, well, whoever's on the court order has the child, blah, 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 and then they walk away. And a lot of times they don't even write a report.
Mm-hmm.
And then when CPS or the attorney or whatever turn to the police officers, well, nothing happened. It was just a bunch of this and that and the accusations and everything else. So I recommend to people that if you are sitting there bloody and you have physical marks on you that you can absolutely prove that they did it because it happened under a camera or something, always protect yourself. Document everything. Get cameras. Record everything, do everything, but be careful of calling the police because it can fight against you. Be careful of what you listen to from therapists because therapists don't understand the court. I've actually had arguments with many a therapist. Don't tell your people to report. That one's going to lose their child if you keep doing that. And I've also had people come to me who have custody of their children already, but they're sharing 50-50 and they want to stop the 50-50 because they know the child's being abused on that 50-50. I tell people if you've got 50-50, don't go to court with accusations. It's not a good idea. I mean, I'm sorry. I know you don't want to do it. It's sad to force the children into that situation. I had a therapist one time out of Washington, believe it or not, tell someone to kidnap their children. They didn't call it kidnap. And they said, take the children away from the father and leave town. I said, are you crazy? I said, the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to get caught and it's going to be kidnapped. The poor woman has been fighting now for 15 years to get her children back because they keep throwing it at her that she kidnapped them. She said, well, they told me to.
That's horrible. And I agree with you as we wrap up here. I agree that, and I say this all the time, therapists can actually make the situation worse, whether it's trying to reunite your children from a court ordered therapy to a guardian ad litem saying we need to have a therapeutic intervention. If you are not with the right therapist who truly understands the psychological abuse of parental alienation, they can actually make the situation worse. Well, Dr. Speer, thank you for joining the podcast. And for our guests for my guests that are interested in reaching out to you, what is the best way to get in contact with you?
Well, the best way is email. That's usually the best way to find me, or on Facebook. You have my Facebook link. You Not Family Court. That's the group. Just just send me a message through Messenger.
Okay.
And I will get back in touch with you because my goal is to help as many people as possible.
Perfect. I will make sure I put all that in our posting when we share the podcast. And thank you again for being a guest on the Fractured Family Podcast.